Peace be upon you. You've heard of cow worshippers, fire worshippers, and Satan worshippers. But have you ever heard of microbe worshippers? Those who've gone to the extreme of deifying microbes and attributing the characteristics of will, choice, knowledge, and creation to them? Let's see how pseudoscience leads its followers to such a state of ignorance. This episode is one of the most important episodes of the journey of certainty. It is full of surprises, so stay tuned. Last episode, we saw how 3/4 of the theory of evolution were demolished by its followers. Innumerable transitional forms, slow change, and gradualism. 2/4 remain: blind natural selection and random changes. Let's tighten the noose. Blind natural selection. Let's ask the evolution theory disciples. In your evolutionary trees, is there a relationship between placentals and marsupials? They'll answer, no, their origins diverged from each other 160 million years ago. Then why are they so similar in form, despite the great difference in their genetic encoding and vital systems? Is it an act of blindness and randomness, or a manifestation of Allah's ability? They'll say, no, not at all. This is a phenomenon known as convergent evolution, i.e., unintended random changes, but due to similar environments, natural selection shaped them in the same way and produced similar results in two unrelated organisms. So in similar environments, natural selection worked in similar ways. What about bats and whales? Do they resemble each other? Of course not, as the smallest bat barely weighs a gram, while the sperm whale weighs up to 50 tons. The more important question is whether their environmental conditions are similar. Of course not. The bat lives on land, while whales live in the water, two completely different environmental conditions. Then, your blind natural selection should act on the bat and the whale in a completely different manner. So why do they have systems in common? Why do we find in both bats and whales an echolocation, sonar system that is nearly identical? A sonar that launches and receives sound waves to determine the direction of their prey. Why didn't such a device appear in other mammals, more related to the bat in your evolutionary trees, or in other terrestrials, like the bat, subject to similar natural selection factors? Doesn't this point to an all-knowing creator who gave everything its form, then guided it? Who gave these two different organisms the system they each need? They answer, no, this is just another type of convergent evolution that works even with different conditions for natural selection. Is that so? Then, what about the cichlid fishes that amazed you? Fish in different lakes, yet with great similarities between them. According to you, they descended from a single common ancestor, then diverged into separate lakes. If their ancestor is the same, why did this origin diversify in one of the lakes into numerous forms, very similar to the numerous forms in another lake? This is not the same situation as placentals and marsupials, where a placental squirrel resembles a marsupial squirrel, but of one fish that, according to you, diversified into many forms in a lake, and another fish like the first one that diversified into many similar forms in a different lake. If you manage to convince some that randomness and blindness can produce two similar organisms, how can you convince them that one organism can produce two nearly identical sets of organisms? They say, we will call this phenomenon parallel evolution. Guys, we are not asking you about a new name for the myth, but for an explanation that can convince any rational person. But this is their way. All universal facts debunk a theory? No problem. Just create a new name to make the listener feel that you are aware of these facts, and you don't see that they pose any threat to your theory. Instead, you've found a scientific explanation and modified the theory to accommodate this fact.
They are fully aware of this.
They explain in detail the facts that debunk their myth, using new titles. So-and-so evolution. The psychological impact is to convince you that, had fact posed any threat to their theory, they would have noticed it. Whereas in reality, they covered up the blatant contradicting evidence with misleading terminology.
Did you see our neighbor's white car?
You mean the black one? Yes, I saw it.
No, his white car.
No, no, the black one. I recognize it.
Look, this is the car. It is white.
Dude, this is called whitish black.
You can simply remove the word evolution from all the comic names of the theory and replace them with impossible, the parallel impossible, the convergent impossible, the quantile impossible, the punctuated impossible, etc. You will find someone who says, "This is an advantage for the theory of evolution, its flexibility to accommodate new discoveries." There is a big difference, dear viewers, between, on one hand, a theory based on something, some solid tenets of mind, senses, and experimentation, then an observation conflicts with some of its details, and these details are modified to accommodate the observation. And on the other hand, a theory based on myths, with all observations demolishing its pillars and emptying it from all content. While you insist on resuscitating this theory by changing its name and proposing additional assumptions without any evidence whatsoever, just like our friend with his conspiracy theory about his neighborhood. Once again, we ask the followers of this theory, we want a scientific explanation, no more names. Is the phenomenon of cichlid fishes, for example, a result of randomness and blind selection? The answer comes from this Nature paper, which states that for such a phenomenon to occur by convergent evolution, an extraordinary coincidence is needed. Frankly, I almost laughed aloud when I read this. So according to you, everything we mentioned before did not require an extraordinary coincidence, just this specific phenomenon. When we used to tell them, living organisms form a fully integrated system that includes predators and preys, birds that feed on flowers and return the favor through pollination, bees with long beaks to suck nectar from deep flowers, figs that split open for a specific kind of insect to transfer its seeds and pollinate other figs while this insect benefits by laying its eggs in the opened figs, each type of fig with its own type of insects, small marine organisms cleaning the gills and teeth of large fish, by eating the parasites and food leftovers, a mutual benefit. Trillions of bacteria of different types in every human intestine, and other countless examples of mutually beneficial relationships. Are all such integrated systems a result of ordinary coincidences? They'll say, yes, and we'll call what happened coevolution. Leave your names aside, our question is clear. Did randomness and blindness create all organisms, male and female, then create this coexistence between them in such an integrated, intricate, and harmonious system? They'll answer, yes, by coincidence. Any self-respecting scientist, dear viewers, follows the evidence wherever it may lead, while the myth disciples want to pull the myth cart against the direction of the horses of evidence. But even they were forced to admit, in view of the cichlid phenomenon, that an extraordinary coincidence was needed. Okay, where do we go from here? They said, it seems that natural election is guided along specific routes. And scientific papers announce that, although natural selection has no predetermined endpoints, i.e. as blind evolution happens along certain trajectories. And you found papers with phrases such as constraints on natural selection. These constraints were even described as absolute or strict. Constraints, constraints, constraints. So, you are saying that blind natural selection is guided. So, with this guidance and constraints, it is no longer blind. Great. Your second fort has just collapsed, the fort of blind natural selection. Did they acknowledge the demise of their myth after this? No. Instead, they sought refuge in their last fort and said, well, the changes are random even if natural selection is constrained, so we will rename the theory to Evo Devo. Let's tighten the noose further as we have reached the first and final remaining fort, the fort of random change. Do changes such as mutations occur randomly? It is important here, dear viewers, to understand that this is a twofold question. First, is it possible for organisms to be formed by random mutations? Second, are the changes that really occur in the genetic material of an organism to help it adapt to a new environment, such as when bacteria acquires resistance to antibiotics? Are they random changes? The burden of truth forced many myth disciples to backpedal on their idea that the change is random. They started using phrases such as, developmental bias, and constraints on evolution. Others stated that the changes are not random, such as this well-known seminal article in Nature in 1988 titled The Origin of Mutants, and this 2014 article in the same journal, which reviewed numerous phenomena, then explicitly stated they show that variation is not random. Similar statements followed that mutations were not random but directed, and that was contradictory to a fundamental neo-Darwinism tenet. Several new terms appeared in evolution literature, such as directed mutations and selected mutations. Moreover, Professor of Biology Dennis Noble made this momentous announcement at the 2013 International Conference of Physiological Sciences.
It is difficult, if not impossible, to find a genome change operator that is truly random in its action within the DNA of the cell. All careful studies of mutagenesis find statistically significant non-random patterns of change.
So, according to Noble, it is difficult, if not impossible, to find random changes in genetic material, and that all types of change are not random. He reaffirms with this statement.
So my first conclusion is this. Not only is mutation not random, that was one of the essential assumptions of the neo-Darwinian synthesis, but proteins, at least some of them, did not evolve via gradual accumulation of mutations.
He affirms that changes are not random and that cellular proteins, at least some of them, did not evolve through random accumulation of mutations. With this, the first and last standing fort of the myth is demolished. So organisms were not formed by random mutations, nor were their adaptations a result of random changes. The last fort has fallen, and it turns out that the forts were made of flimsy carton, and their insides were like a mirage in a desert. The thirsty one thinks it is water until when he has reached it, he finds it to be nothing. Nothing remains of the myth of evolution. No innumerable transitional forms, no slow change, no gradualism, no blind natural selection, no random changes. So, what did the myth followers do? Did they concede the destruction of their myth? Never. Instead, Professor Noble and others demanded an extension for the theory of evolution. While Nature's statement that mutations are not random headlined with, "Does evolutionary theory need a rethink?" Really? This scenario reminds me of two doctors examining a skeleton, and one asks the other, "Do you think he needs treatment?" The other doctor replies, "I believe he is doing well. His blood pressure is good, his pulse is excellent, and his breathing is fine." So, the myth followers will never budge. By hook or by crook, there must be evolution. But what word to put before evolution? This is what we can disagree upon. Nothing remains of evolution, yet the predetermined doctrinal outcome is still standing. The blind doctrine of no creation must remain. Notice that the meaning of the word evolution in all these theories and amendments has come to mean literally no creation, that organisms are not created with wisdom and intention. This statement is the true literal meaning of the word evolution. This meaning must endure for the myth zealots at any cost, and all roads must lead to this myth. That's why they conclude their comic modifications to the theory by saying, "This updated model of the theory solves Darwin's dilemma without the need for an intelligent designer." Just like Hawking's joke of gravity creating everything and that this removes the need for a creator, this is the predetermined result that must remain at any cost. The theory has been completely emptied of all content and its pillars demolished. Yet, its predetermined outcome must endure, even if it's hanging in midair, that there is no creation with will and intent. Now, after they said that changes are not random but directed, and that natural selection is directed, a burning question presents itself. Who is responsible for this direction? Here, you see them attributing this guidance to any material thing, regardless of how absurd the attribution is, rather than attributing it to the all-knowing doer whom no vision can encompass, yet he is evidenced by everything. They attribute direction to evolution, as in this Nature paper, which states that evolution managed to reduce the risk of deleterious mutations, i.e., prevent their randomness. Evolution? Evolution is dead. Evolution, after the destruction of its forts, is just a ghost of something that never even existed. Other times, they attribute the selection of mutations to the cells themselves, as in this Nature paper, which concluded with, cells may have mechanisms for choosing which mutations will occur. So, cells, before they existed, decided to generate the appropriate mutations necessary for their existence, which allowed evolution to occur. In other publications, they attribute selection to microbes. They even termed this microbial intelligence, which they define as the intelligence shown by microorganisms. In addition to other terms, such as clever microbes, cells are incredibly smart. Brainy bacteria. Bacteria choose. Bacteria decide. Bacteria are more capable of complex decision-making than thought. Bacteria are big thinkers, etc. They even went so far as to attribute intelligence to viruses. Surprisingly intelligent viruses. Dear viewers, we are not talking about figurative expressions, but about attributing will and intelligent selection to microbes because they don't believe in a Lord who gave each thing its form, then guided it. A Lord who is in charge of his creation, whose greatness is manifest in all his creatures. To whom then will they attribute the dazzling, complex, and precise behavior exhibited by organisms? To whom will they attribute choice, knowledge, and creation? They have to attribute these divine attributes to creatures, even microbes, thereby becoming more like microbe worshippers. Yes, worshippers of microbes. Have you not seen those who argue regarding Allah's signs? How are they turned away? Don't you see those who dispute Allah's written signs, Quranic verses, and observed signs in the universe, how they end up, and where their stubbornness and arrogance takes them? How they themselves become microbes, harmful to human intelligence by attributing intelligence to microbes. In Rajasthan, India, there are temples where they worship rats. I would not be surprised if one day the myth disciples set up temples to worship bacteria. In fact, some of them went so far as to attribute actions to inanimate atoms, saying that there is intelligence at the atomic or molecular level, and that the existence of internal intelligence leads to the confirmation of the absence of an external intelligence or God. They went over and beyond ascribing actions to matter, to ascribe actions to laws of nature, i.e. to nothing, like Stephen Hawking, who attributed all creation to the law of gravity, and was accordingly praised by Dawkins, who said, Darwinism kicked God out of biology, but physics remained more uncertain. Hawking is now administering the coup de grace. This is Richard Dawkins, whose countless lies we've exposed in previous episodes, as well as his deceit, prevarication, and delirium. Yet he is still applauded by some Arab zealots of the myth.
Richard Dawkins was fortunate and lucky. He is ecstatic to this day with this experiment. A scientist. Whether you agree with him or not, the man is a scientist with a scientist mentality and scientist passion. He sanctifies science, exalts and rejoices in it. It's amazing.
These are the scientists whose images are embellished for Muslims. And this is what whims and desires do to their followers when they put disbelief in the Creator as a goal and subjugate everything to serve this goal. They are people who have already taken the decision to disbelieve, but signs and warnings are of no avail for people who do not believe. To conclude, dear viewers, when the myth followers try to dazzle you with the percentage of scientists who support evolution, let's set aside their lies about the percentage, as we'll show. Ask them the following simple question. This 98% or 99% percentage support which type of evolution exactly? We saw in the last episode how much they disagree. They are also in major disagreement about the specifics of today's episode. Are mutations random or not random? Is selection directed or not directed? They differ vastly in their views on such questions. So why not admit it honestly? What you're saying is that this percent of scholars insist in advance that there must be no creation. But beyond that, they don't agree about anything. Look at this dogmatic, blind, predetermined position. May Allah guide our listeners from the Muslim youth who've been affected by the myth's pollution. Guide us and them to the truth with your permission. You guide whomever you will to a straight path. Peace and mercy of Allah be upon you.